Okay. Michelle, so over to you.
Thanks very much. I think I am unmuted now. Can you hear me? Yes. I wanted to start the evening just by thanking the team at the Red Wheelbarrow. To Jacques and the team, thank you so much for offering poets this platform of reading their work. I think especially during times of COVID where we've had so little opportunity to hear poetry read, this is just an incredible platform for poets to continue being able to present their work. And it's a very important function that you're fulfilling. And I just would like to thank you for all the time and effort and energy that goes into organizing every session, which I know is great. I just wanted to say a few words about Brian's book. When I first read that manuscript, I remember distinctly sitting down and thinking immediately, I have to read this again. And I read it twice completely in one sitting. And I knew then that I was reading a most compelling piece of literature. The collection is imbued with imagery from the natural world. There are images of birds that abound, kestrels and terns and all kinds of plants. One of my favorite, the tree fuchsia, there's an entire poem on the tree fuchsia. But mangroves and forests, all kinds of plants like violets, African violets, wells, and imagery not only of South Africa, but from around the world. France, Guadeloupe, and not only nature, but art is also interwoven in the literature. The work of the famous sculptor Rodin is written about, in several of the poems. It's the collection is a sensitive consideration of man and woman's place in the world, an assessment of our earthly life, and then an intimate and sensitive consideration of the life after this one. And I think that these topics are even more relevant now with the pandemic than they were when Brian wrote that book and when I first read that manuscript in 2019. And Brian himself is a man who seems to me to be intimately connected with the themes that he writes about. As many of you will know, Brian is a teacher to both students, to colleagues, and to many of his friends. And his friend circle is very wide. He seems to me to be a breath that is woven from the words that he writes. He is sensitive, he is compelling, he is wise. And I consider myself lucky to have been able to work with Brian on bringing this fine, fine collection to publication. And I think that everyone who is listening tonight will really be gifted by listening to Brian read his poetry. And so thank you. It comes back to my first point, to thank the Red Wheelbarrow for offering this platform to enable us to listen to Brian reading his poetry.
Okay. Brian, over to you. Thank you very much, Michelle, for being here.
Thanks so much, Jacques, and thanks also to Michelle. Am I coming through clearly enough? Yeah, okay. What I thought I would do with this reading is just read a few poems that show a bit of the narrative arc of this work. And just a wee bit of background. Cheryl and I were traveling to the island of Guadeloupe in the West Indies, where she had a conference. So I was lucky enough to tag along. And to prepare my mind for that trip, I started digging into Derek Walcott's multitudinous verse and his work, just to get a feeling of the West Indies and through the eyes of a poet in the English language. And his work, his multitudinous work, has had a tidal pull on my own in this text. And one poem that hit me right between the eyes when I was doing that reading was Dog Star. I'll read just a few lines from it. The dog star's rabid. Our street burns its spilt cabbage. Spent with heat, I brood on 3 good friends dead in 1 year. 1 summer's shock, here where summer never ends. And there's a sense there of that rabid, hot street that gives me a bit of a sense of the mid-scenes from Romeo and Juliet, where the feud breaks out and the death enters the play from that point. But more particularly, that 3 good friends dead in 1 year spoke to my situation just at that time. I had been asked to speak at the memorial services of 3 close friends, colleagues, soulmates. They had all died within a 6-month period, a life-changing, death-facing emptiness in that valley of shadow that I was in. Then the other text that's somewhat related to that is when I worked at Fort Hare, I taught the Nigerian writer Amos Bukwala, the palm wine drinker and his dead palm wine tapster in Deadstown. It's a racy quest. Where the palm wine tapster goes to Deadstown to retrieve the palm wine drinker goes to Deadstown to retrieve his tapster from the place of death. And that sort of eternal human quest, the journey to Deadstown that Christ went to Deadstown, Odysseus, Aeneas, Virgil and Dante and so on. It became the sort of narrative focus of this book. And for me, the everyday events of the trip through France to Guadeloupe and back, those everyday experiences touched by the deeper allegory of that journey to Deadstown. And that really became the journey of this book, I think what I've called the narrative arc. But just to set the scene, I want to read Ordinary Water. When the tapster, he lived an Edenic life. He was given as many palm trees as you wanted. When he couldn't keep up tapping them for palm wine, his father gave him a tapster. He drank liters and liters of palm wine, and he had many friends, and he never had to work. And then the tapster dies, and the Eden comes to an end. And he had to, very miserably, he had to drink what he calls ordinary water. And he said, rather sadly, I did not satisfy with it as palm wine. And this poem is called Ordinary Water. It's a tribute to the drinking palm wine drinker. This has been a year of waits, with 3 friends gone, each a fellow on this dark and sorry way through woods to the simple place of the dead, with whom I so easily drank, embraced in the night inns, whom I travelled with by day. So I've drank tributes to each, falling a drunken poet down the barhouse stair, and I was bitten by a dog that I, so pissed, petted despite my host's appeals, putting my guitar finger out of joint. Or slush, rubbed with lost fingertips the shoulders of the widow, kindly kneading, keening flesh to keep a friend conjured there. Drunk till I am done, and return to the strange light of this world, where citizens toil, maybe screw each other for a buck, or shoot or stab at human flesh, or develop someone's land for cash, in this poor world where I must drink again ordinary water. Kind of sets the tone for the quest. The next poem is called Quest, and it recalls Bird Island in Lambert's Bay, a place of teeming life. When the trusty wine tapster of the palm wine drinker dies, it's the old loss of a workless paradise, or of his own psyche, or that midway failing of soul. And then the old wise folk tell that all those recently gone always dwell a while in a place somewhere in this world. So he sets out himself to find the occupation of the dead. The artist daily lifts old eyes to the sea and walks the sand of a million flecks of shell to ponder the psyche and mulls the allegories of death with us, underfoot and over the land, and witnesses the shores awash with the old passing tides, to find that life is urgent still, as time nests here and spawns and swims with the twisting seals, flying with the gannets and gulls. There's a trope in the much Elizabethan writing, um, the world upside down, where rivers run backwards and so on. And that came a bit into this text because when the palm wine drinker gets to Dead's Town, he finds, well, as I put it in this poem, at Dead's Town, he finds that the deads walk, of course, only backwards, while he still treads like us with his face. And Dead's Town is an inverted world, and I think sometimes those worlds become blurred. And this poem, Guadeloupe, is the traveling and arriving in that island place, but it's also a poem of inversion. And the Walcott poem that I've started off at the top of the head of my own reads, past 30 now, I know to love the self is dread of being swallowed by the blue of heaven overhead or the rougher blue below. And those two blues, and when you fly in airplanes, you see those two blues, and that's really the beginning of this poem, Turning. The Atlantic is deep blue, and from this plane it looks like sky, and the clouds down there, like clouds up against the firmament, turning my head upside down. To get it right, I need to peer down hard and find that rough solidity of the wave ripples. And I search in vain for a ship to give my mind its bearings, to punctuate the endless blue with a dash of sense, to help me find where I am, which way, and who. The second part of this poem is trompe l'oeil, the trick of the eye. Somewhere, the sky merges with ocean, and blue become one deep wash of aerial marine. Old elements harmonize, one canvas spans from dome to depth. So when the plane banks, that ocean liner going our way off the starboard side flies, fellow traveling in our watery skies. Third part of this poem is Disembarked. This looks so like Nigeria, he says, and it does and does not, for the island topples our thoughts in a topsy-turvy land that is and is not, with ways both new and old in this Caribbean town. Dead's Town echoes our ways, so that questing drink had found, and on an isle of sugar cane and slaves, a forts as round as Martello towers, this poor plot in the tropics of spice, where trios of brown pelicans plunge, where the tempest Maria flattened forests, rooted up rich banana farms, and sloshed such water from the skies that struck chaos in the elements. On this slip of Africa, cut and planted, made French, the old motherland bent insular, men made seafarers or fishers, our grasp of things spins upside down. There's a sense in that poem of Maria. Just before we went to the Caribbean, the tornado went through and flattened quite a lot of the island of Guadeloupe, amongst other islands. And although that fixed up a lot, we could still see a lot of the wreckage there. And Maria, the tornado, enters the text at this point, but she comes back as the Virgin Mary a bit later in another more benign form. The central poem of, I think, the first section of this book is one called La Pointe. I like that title because it looks like Lap Went, Lapwent. It looks like something from the Cotswolds or Derwent Waters. It looks like that, but it's not. It's La Pointe, which is the Creole word for Pointe de Pitre, which is the Peter's Point, the name of the capital city of Guadeloupe. So it's a Creole rendition of Point, La Pointe à Pitre. I roam the streets of Pointe de Pitre and mark the residential flats, the buildings both unkempt and spruce, and consider that to maintain a house on this isle of the tropics must be hell, fretting in daily deep humidity and toiling in the rough face of tempests where the palm bowing hurricanes sprout, where wild Maria's wrecks are twisted still. I mark the huge church, the schools at work with children's shouts, corner shops and kitchen vans fitted out, driven by generators where folks sell. Here's a man trades at a simple table, his single dish, sitting like patience. While outside a deathly silent door, there sprawls an emblematic guy, long lounging in his plastic chair, his hat drawn darkly over his face, while old time runs down his legs and back to earth. Let the world blow away. It seems he wouldn't know or care. And so I walk amongst the living here, setting myself quite pointedly adrift to wander amongst the quick mundane so that our simple allegories can show. Part 2. There's a beckoning place, quiet and quaint, up a side street where I want to be. A white painted village with such old world tumbled up small houses, a dinky town, a veranda here or soft glass windows, magical. And I'm drawn by quietness, by the orderly retreat. Up ahead, I see crosses like it's a holy place, but not a foot stirs. There's an open gate, so I walk in, and then I know the place. Sepulchres, mausoleums, and old tombs of generations, the town of the dead. Part 3. There are small residences for the lifeless, hundreds with their little stoops and leading steps, roadways and paths, all beckon with family names, candles and flowers. And yesterday was All Saints' Day, and all the living came. Now behind glass, cold candles wait. Pictures of the dead watch me, intruder with fleshy weight, out of time, oozing fate. Part 4. My mind is quick to shift and trip all along the verandas, the stoops, and flits up the quaint steps behind the glass, finding squat candles spent. Open eyes wander, up and down, beguiling roadways and brown dips, up the hill and far over the dead town of crosses and old family names. One man washes his sins and body before his people. Another youth skulks down the way of many deaths, retreating from my face. Eyes upon me, all history watches. The eyes behind the glass see right through, deconstruct me, till I become but figurative, myself, alone with a pale face, walking dead roads amongst the slave fields of cane, sugar cane and forts, where my living flesh, whatever I do or say or become, is but someone else's allegory. I often send, with other poetry projects I'm involved in, I send texts to a friend of mine who does a bit of reading, and she did not like the way I spelled Legavan. She said it's Leguan. And I said, no, I used to say it Legavan or Legavan. But if you spell it Legavan, you don't read it like that. So we used to debate it. And I went to the Dictionary of South African English, which said the following: despite long and well-established use in South African English, neither the spelling nor the pronunciation of this word has become standardized. So it gives a bit of license for us to spell it the way we need to. And this poem is called Spelling. It has a sense of the spelling of the word, but also a spell, which is where that word comes from. The Legavan storms by, this island reptile, blue-green with a white spot on her head, like a third eye. Here called an iguana or liguana, which back home metamorphosed through misunderstanding into leguan, or on my child's tongue, legavan. You need only see in a sand cliff of a lone river bank a legavan hole, the beast immersed in half dark, dead still, half in, half out, to leave in no doubt the hefty amphibious influence of the word. I recall legavan, conflate grammar, draw the article into the noun, change emphasis, recreate sense, turn the rules of language upside down. All these spellings run in my mind as the creature articulates by. Her touching tongue split and slipping tastes the ground. I try to conjure the distant world of her brain, hear the articulation of her thoughts, invoke my reptile mind and our kinship rent by evolving time. I watch her tail tip drag off, unseemly, slow and meekly towing the backward point that marks the unaware. All are upside down, inside out, arrogant and back to front, knowing. There's a lot there's a lot we don't see, don't know, don't recognize. And the next poem has a little bit to do with that. As Michelle said, a poem about a kestrel. But I've subtitled this Our Wind Hover because many of us know Hopkins, Gerard Manley Hopkins' Wind Hover, where the bird in the sky becomes the image of the cross, the Christ figure, a benign presence looking over the world. But this kestrel is not so benign, and it's our fault. Kestrel. It's easy now to slip uphill in cars, snaking up these smooth, tarred roads to the valley of desolation, sacrificing all the slow and proper awe a hiker owns, coming up the harder paths through dolerite rock and mountain veld. And down the beetling cliffs and branches, we view the old and leafy frontier town, her growing grey townships, offset and uncreative still, and sad in that South African way, that old South African way that cleaves our landscapes yet and heart. But now a kestrel hovers just out there, his wings stretched static, fittingly aflutter, holding his position in the air, lingeringly waiting, watchful, hunting amongst the rock and scrub for critters that scurry, unaware, as sharp-eyed time holds the skies, watching us with kestrel eyes. That poem, of course, is South Africa, and we do tend to mix up the geography in the poems a bit. And I'm going to read, just looking at my time, Jacques. I'm going to read a poem called, actually, I think I'm going to leave that one out, just for time. I'm going to go to Mangrove Mud. Also starts with an epigraph from Walcott, where he says, leisurely, the egret on the mud tablet stamps its hieroglyph. Mangrove mud, all is still. The bare trees, fern grey, reflect on listless waters like unforgetfulness, like death twists in wood. Only some little egrets, white, white, and there, white, living specks, pick quietly along the slow mud shadows or perch unmoving on the stark branches. All is fixed, as set as art, where the osprey perches in her as she did before place. Her wings settle dark. The scene like a canvas, some grotesque still life, with dead grey branches that ghost the afternoon light. Tangled, twisted in an agony of old dying. All is lifeless now in this disremembered space, this word, image, scene of no forgetting. And it's just another image of the Valley of Desolation, the place of the dead, and so on. But there is always a bit of poetry. And it's, yeah, I was glad to hear Jacques read Thomas Hardy to open this session, because Hardy was a poet who I really love, both as a novelist and a poet. And this poem is called Shell. Hermit crabs walk the land here, bearing borrowed shells. Along the mud pathway, a shell stops and wobbles. The crab legs are drawn in until the shell lies dead. Here, a crab in a shell tries to make me believe his homely shell is but a random thing, dead in itself, using a house of metaphor so well in her poetry of the pathway, keeping herself safe in a dead shell, alive with suggestion. Thread. In Memoriam, Viv England, Mike Sneyman, and Norman Morrissey. It's the frailty, the thin thread of life. I've breathed words from tentative scripts at memorials for 3 friends this year, alone, and my heart is as dull as our hollow water tank, bass-toned this drought. I miss each one dearly, their dreams now done. I watched their paths fade into sick beds, death beds, heard the death rattle, Christ. I see what we are. Our way strips back and narrows. And yet this morning, my dead bougainvillea bonsai, a cascade I'd given up on, there, tiny shoots on her tips. The Virgin Mary has a number of, I suppose in South Africa we could call them praise names. Telemara, the god of the star of the sea, Semper Virgo, always virgin. And this, where we stayed in Guadeloupe, a little town called La Gofia, this poem's about that, called Stella Maris, Semper Virgo. Walking randomly in town, as I like to do, enabling the unexpected, I find myself strolling up a road that rolls down past the empty stadium, past the lonely lagoon of the multitudinous crab folk, the wet bird print mud and smells, and out to sea. My mind wandering always to the slave narratives I read by night, fathoming other walkers and their long shadows. I feel myself trailing clouds of history where everything I am has become accusation, my language, being, education, my work, and all. A small child is walking up, the blue top, white shorts, skinny dark legs, her hair that homely African suede. It's her world, giving her space. I look down, hear a tiny bonjour. An old man's heart is easily rent. As meek words drop and bless, I am part of a world, a brief humanity, and I am grasping for French. But bonjour, I respond late, forlorn, a forgetful elder, wondering how caught I am by virgin kindness. I remember reading that poem when someone said, "What on earth is virgin kindness?" Um, I'm not going to try and explain what I think virgin kindness is. But that child, in all the uncertainty of one's own life and all one's self-accusations and all the horrid history of colonialism and slavery that you read, and you get that everlasting child's kindness. It was that moment that Maria, the hurricane, returned in a gentler form. And here she is again, the Grande Sophia. And Sophia is the sulfur gate. I use the word in the poem. It's the volcano name, but it's also the gate to the underworld. It's also the gate to hell. And it picks up that theme of the book that I've been working on. From the mangrove swamp, with its rich and static waters, dark and brown, black, blue, the path snakes through the margin zone of those worldly yellow hibiscus trees and quickly out to the clear lap of ocean. Beyond, across the broad bay sweep, is the opaque blue mountain of the bigger island, volcanic, silent and softly grand, the great sulfur gate, hunching its strength and waiting. But here, just in from the sea, just a lazy stone-top length, is a small building, dirty white and cracked, seeming to be an unkempt restroom, crouched with that windowless threat, and I skirt it, circumspect, and turn to find it is a simple shrine, light blue walls inside, a ceiling black with holy candle soot, floor and shelf busy with icons, crucifixes, and fresh flowers. In this world of such wear and tear, I find myself in a glade with flitting hummingbirds and birdsong, where just steps from our uncertain sea, a small shrine has candles burning for Mary, Notre Dame de la Mer. One of the many suggestions that Michelle made when reading the text was to put this poem last. I'll read it for her. Latter day. I have come full circle, I. Once an old child, God's trustworthy, now a puerile elder in the making, as trustworthy as hell. Steeping wet like a sieve, worn and rusted, wetting like an infant, like a well. And leaks will run to nothing. I'll roll my trouser legs and wade to new paddocks and let anyone ask why. I know, I can tell, I have come full circle. I. Thanks, Jacques and colleagues for joining me.
Okay. Brian, that was an incredibly moving reading. Can we have a round of applause? Can you unmute yourselves and just give a hand to Brian, please?
Yoo-hoo! Great.
We are just very grateful that you took time off from your grandfatherly duties to read to us. I was incredibly moved. I'm sure we all were by your reading. And thank you, Michelle, for being here and for remembering to say all the things that I forgot to say in introducing Brian. Thank you. So I usually hand over at this point when hands are raised in the room. We're going to just have a short question and answer session before we have a break and an open mic section. Are there, Melissa, would you like to?
Yeah, Douglas has a hand up.
Just a small observation that's kind of interesting. I was rooting around in the cubbyhole of my old Fiesta the other day, and I came across about 4 or 5 magnetic tapes, little tapes, you know, musical tapes. That's very old technology, which I'd stored in there because the car is so old. It has a tape player, and one of those tapes was a recording of Eliot's Burnt Norton. So my interesting observation is that Brian's voice in intonation and your speech pattern is interestingly similar to T.S. Eliot's. He has a more posh voice, and you have the, let's call it the amelioration of the South African rounding of corners. But you have a very similar tone in toning or in tonality to Eliot. I mean, it was quite interesting to me to hear that.
Thanks, Douglas. I'm just glad that wasn't a question.
Jacques, I see your hand up. Do you want to ask something, or Barbara? Oh, you muted yourself. There we go.
There we go. I go topsy-turvy. Brian, I wonder if I can find words for this one, but can you say something about, I love the image of you setting yourself adrift on this journey. That's an image I remember from the poem in which you actually make it to the town of the dead in Guadeloupe. Do you want to say something about what can happen to us? It almost feels to me as if you find a strange sort of state of grace when you are willing to do that. Can you say something about that? What it feels like to be adrift in that way and sort of to be under the gaze of the other, of the dead. Is it something you can speak to, or if you prefer, did you set out? Did you find yourself in the middle of writing this book after your friends died, or was it something that you set out to do?
Probably the former. I think I had started a number of the poems, and they started to coalesce around another journey. That is it. Douglas Livingstone, who talks, is it Gent in a Wildcat, when he talks about going further than he had meant to go, or something. I don't know if I've got the right poem, but that's that sense of I think I use the phrase enabling the unexpected. And it's Cheryl will tell you I'm a very poor tourist. When she goes to places, she likes to be organized. I like to get lost. I just walk and see where I find myself. And I think on that occasion, it was very real to me on that occasion, because Cheryl was at a conference and I went alone to Point Apirka. And if I had read tourist books, if I had planned a trip, I might not have been so surprised as I was when I found in this Catholic cemetery. I'm so used to the Protestant, I'm so used to graveyards, just with that this place that was a town, a living, and I had been looking for an image, and there I found the image, and it was because I saw something and just followed my lead. So it quite literally happened like that on that occasion, but it also happens to be the way I like to discover things. But I think there was a poet I had in mind, and I think it's Douglas Livingstone, who has a phrase about that journey where you push yourself into places that you're not certain of. But to me, that seems in some ways also to be the poet's journey. I had a number of references in this text, and a number of them got lost as I trimmed poems, but I had a number of allusions to Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken, which also to me is the poet's journey. Is you go this way, and then what would have happened if you would go? One of the poems I left out. Those who knew me are gone, and that was one of the terrible things about losing old friends. Was the people I grew up, the people who knew me the best, were no more. The paths eroded in my mind, the well-trodden roads of over and over lament, and old and leaf shaken, I try to find a thought not taken. And I had in mind there also Frost's Road Not Taken. So there's something about that uncertain journey, Jacques. I don't know if I can say more about it, but yes.
Yeah, we can talk for, thank you, but it's a beautiful answer. We can talk for a long time. I thought of, as you spoke, I thought of that poem by Ruthka, you know, I learn by going where I have to go. No, thank you.
Thanks for that question.
Rolf, I saw you had your hand up a little while ago. Do you have a question still? You're muted if you do.
Sorry, no, I mixed it up. I just wanted to read a poem later, so that was a mix-up.
Cool, no problem. Anyone else who'd like to ask anything of Brian? Not seeing any hands. Doesn't look like it. Then I suppose, seems you've escaped a grilling.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Yeah.
So I think then we can take a break and meet back in 5 or so minutes for the open mic. Anyone who'd like to stay and share is welcome to. Thank you, Brian, for that.
Thanks,
Beautiful
Paul.
reading.
I think just to echo Michelle, it's thank you for the space. I think you guys do a good service to poetry, and even though I was traveling, I didn't want to miss the chance to be with you guys. So thanks a lot.
Oh, I appreciate you making that effort. Thank you. Jacques, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to say, is it easy to find the book? Is it easy to get hold of your books? I imagine there are people who want to find it immediately.
Thanks, Jacques. That's a good question, and I can answer that more easily than some of the earlier ones. The book is very readily available, but Michelle might be able to add, but I think the easiest way to get it was off the Drive website. It's available there. Michelle, perhaps in Cape Town there are other outlets you might like to talk about?
So all of our dried press books are available at better bookstores. You probably, I don't know how many of you know, but the publishing industry is in quite turmoil after COVID. And a lot of the bookstores did massive returns of stock. So you might find if you go to exclusive books that the book is not there, but if you ask them to order it for you, they'll have it in a day or two because we are on their order supplier lists. But the easiest and quickest way is to just buy it online on the Dryad Press website, which is at www.dryadpress.co.za. And we've always got specials running. If you buy two or more books, you get a 20% discount. And we do door-to-door delivery as well. So you'll have your book within a few days of ordering. And they're very easy payment options on the website, very safe and easy options. So I think that would probably be the best way to purchase Brian's book.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome, thank you for that. The website's also in the chat. I saw Michelle did share it there if you didn't write it down in time. Cool. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brian, for zooming in with us from across the world. We will take a 5-minute break. So let's meet back here at about 8:30 for us. And anyone who'd like to stay and share poems is most welcome to. If you want to share after the break, you can raise your hand on the Zoom features or pop your name in the chat in the meantime, and I'll call on you.